My name is Riki Aihara. I will be 26 in a few days. I grew up here in Torrance. I went to school at San Diego State University and lived in San Diego for 6 years. I studied environmental studies, sustainability, and I minored in business. After my studies, I wanted to travel, explore the world. Kind of started with my study abroad, going to New Zealand. Got exposed to that culture, went to Fiji and Samoa. I really loved it, and I got bit pretty hard by the travel bug. Um, Last year, I did a year backpacking trip in South America. I went to Peru, Chile, Bolivia, and Colombia. Spent about 11 months in total. 6 months in Peru, which I loved. Did lots of hiking around South America, tried lots of great food, met a lot of wonderful people as well too. Um, and after about a year, I got to come home, celebrated one of my brother's wedding, and decided that I wasn't quite ready to get a career or a full-time job. So continued working in the restaurant business, saved some money, and recently I had the opportunity to go to Cuba for 2 weeks. It was a really eye-opening and an amazing experience. It was very different from any other country I've been to. The community, the culture, everything was very rich, very different. And I guess my favorite part about Cuba was definitely the people. The Cubans are super friendly, they're so open. It's the safest country I've been to. You can walk the streets as a single female, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and you're fine. Everyone's safe, everyone is willing to help you, take care of you, and it was definitely the highlight of my trip. Um, if you don't speak Spanish, I don't necessarily recommend going because you're missing out on one of the best parts about the country, and that's dealing with the people. Everyone says that this is the time to go to Cuba, which is now the doors have opened. But I don't know if things are going to actually change that much, personally. I did go technically a little bit before Americans were freely allowed to travel. It's very easy. Cubans will actually allow pretty much anyone into their country. You just need a little tourist card that you can buy in any other country but the United States of America. It's $20, and your entrance is very easy. The reason why I say that things might not change is because the government still has lots of control over pretty much everything. The way that I like to travel is just with my backpack, very simple. Take a bus, hitchhike, and meet people along the way. However, Cuba is kind of set up to where they minimize that. You have to take a certain bus if you're a tourist. The buses only go at certain times to certain places. It doesn't really allow you to freely travel the country. They kind of want you to go to specific cities. And in those cities, there are only maybe 1 or 2 hotels, which are government owned, of course. You have the option of staying in a casa particular, which is, for me, the best way to travel and which I recommend. It's basically that you're staying in someone's home. They open up their house to you. You live with the family. You're renting a room in their home. You usually get your own bathroom, and they can even cook meals for you. But why I recommend this is because the money will go directly back to the people, to this family. It won't go to the government and then be passed along whatever kind of channels that are unknown. One of the running jokes that you hear a lot in Cuba is, where does it go? And everyone goes, oh, I don't know, where does the money go? And no one really has an idea, because the wages are so minimal in comparison to the costs of things. One really interesting thing about Cuba is that they have 2 forms of currency. the CUC and the CUP. The CUP is the pesos nacionales and what the original form of currency was. And they started with the CUCs about a couple years ago, I believe, and it is basically the equivalent of an American dollar. And this is what all the tourists use for the most part. Most everything is in price of the CUC, and the people, the Cubans, use both as well too. So there are some things, say an electronic or something a little bit more high quality or expensive, that's going to be priced as a CUC. And the cost of it is comparable to the United States. However, they get paid their salaries in the pesos nacionales. And so what it converts to, first of all, one CUC, the converted peso, which is $1, is 25 national pesos. So it's a huge gap. It's obviously going to be a lot harder for you to buy things if you're only getting paid in pesos, is which they do. So the normal or average monthly salary for a government job is anywhere between $8 to $12, maybe 15 for a decent job. But so you're getting paid $15 a month, and you can go into a store and you can try to buy a plastic wash bucket, something very simple for your home, and that could cost about $10, 10 CUCs. So people are struggling, definitely, especially if you don't have a home that you can rent to people, especially if you're not in a tourist town. These people are getting paid very minimal, almost nothing, and yet they still have to buy certain things at the CUC price. But with that being said, there are certain things that the government offers. Every family household is allowed a couple pounds of rice, sugar, beans, salt, coffee, and maybe one other thing. But basically the basic needs are very low in price. They get a monthly stipend, but you have to be with your family. So there's this little book per household that has everyone's listed names, and you have to own a home in order for you to obtain your own book. Therefore, if you're young, say you're in your 20s, you don't have your own established job yet, you cannot really move away from your family if you still want to depend on that monthly ration of food. You could always go out to another store and buy your food on the street. Obviously, it's going to be more expensive that way, but people do that. However, most people tend to live with their parents or live nearby for almost all of their life, if not their whole entire life, until their parents pass and pass that home on to them. Also, most people would say that monthly ration does not get them by the full month. After that, you have to go into the store, buy whatever you need at a higher price. Also, can't really live off just beans and rice. However, most Cubans will be eating that every day for almost every meal. The food is very basic. The Cuban food that we have here in the United States is very different, in my opinion, from what they have there, just because the availability of what we are allowed here. You can mix flavors, spices, different meats. Those things are very limited there. You eat a lot of maybe chicken or pork, but the portions of the meat are much smaller than what we're used to here. And I would say that about most of the countries that I've been to. You can't really go into Peru either and request a nice fillet of steak or a ribeye. It's just not a thing. But in Cuba, the food is good. The food is good. It's okay. I think they make tasty food with what they've been given. A lot of people mostly cook, but you can buy little things on the street. Although street food isn't a very popular thing, it's mainly just pizzas, pastas, and little sandwiches. Lots of carbs, obviously, lots of carb loading. So actually how I got to Cuba was I first went to Mexico City, and you can go directly from Mexico to Cuba, no problem, but I went to Panama, which is where I purchased my tourist card that you need to enter the country, and I arrived in Havana at around 11:30 at night. So I couldn't really see that much at the time, but the first thing when you arrive is you feel this really moist, warm air. And Cuba in general is very hot, very humid. So the air was actually kind of nice at night. It's almost fresh like, but it is still very warm at night. And you arrive at the airport, and there's still lots of people waiting outside in taxis to take you wherever you need. And you drive through the city, and at this time I obviously couldn't see that much, but you can see lots of trees, lots of greenery. Streets are not that large. There's only maybe two-way streets going out throughout the whole country. The buildings are tall, Spanish style. They all have their own little balconies. And when you wake up in the morning, the city is a bustle. It is lively from 7 o'clock in the morning. There are people out in the streets, kind of slowly starting the day. In Havana, mostly. This is only in Havana do they start at this time. But because it's so hot, people are always out on the street. There are always people sitting outside in the corner, talking to their neighbors across the street. Havana is a very lively city, and I really loved it, actually. I typically don't like the capital cities of most countries just because they're so busy. There's so many people. People aren't as nice. A big city is a big city, but to me, Havana has this wonderful breath of life that's just so energizing and so lovely that it's nice to be around. And because people are so friendly, you don't really get the feeling that you're an outsider either. Me being an Asian American female, most people don't assume that I'm American. But one thing that they did understand is once I said I was born in California, they immediately knew that I was American. Whereas in other countries, because of my face, they would maybe not understand that, or maybe not believe me. Even if I spoke English and I do not speak any Japanese, they would tie me to my Asian ancestry. But in Cuba, they knew immediately that I was an American citizen. But they still want to know, they want to question you, they want to know about your culture, they want to know about what you like to do, what you like to eat, what's available, what kind of phone you have, where you buy your clothes. They want to know this, since they're not allowed to travel. This is their traveling. Their traveling is talking to foreigners, talking to people from different countries and learning through them. So they're very friendly. The first day I was in Havana, I was approached by maybe 5 different people asking if I needed help, if I needed to go to the bank, if they wanted to show me a place to eat. And although I do believe that most of it was out of the kindness of their heart, they also are given tips if they take you to a certain restaurant, or if they take you to a certain bar or place like that. The Cuban will get paid by that restaurant as well. So there is a little bit in it for them. However, most people are willing to bring you into their homes and help you out no matter what. But Havana is very colorful in many ways. All of the houses are painted, like they all have these really high buildings, so you walk along the street and there are just people above you, there's people next to you, there's people everywhere. And there are people out in the street until well late into the night. And again, you just always feel very safe though, and that was one thing I really loved about Cuba. It was so safe. And the people are just so friendly. And I was only in Havana for 2 days in the beginning. There I met a vegetable or produce seller. A lot of people will still kind of push these little carts along the city on certain routes and sell peppers or garlic, little kinds of vegetables that people need to buy for their dinners. And oddly enough, that job can make 3 or 4 times more than any government paid job that there is. I met a young man who was working as a computer, not an engineer, but he worked with computer systems, and they made $8 a month. And he worked for a couple years, saved up his money, and eventually bought this cart. Didn't have very many much produce to buy at that point, but slowly grew and grew, saved money, and now he has his own route, sells his vegetables, and makes something like $70 a month. So, you know, a lot more than what his computer job could do. And he was he actually gave me money, and I didn't even do anything. But they have these bills with Che Guevara on it that lots of tourists like, and he just gave it to me. That's how they are. They're just very giving. But they're so open. You can just go and sit down with someone and talk about whatever, and they'll give you their life history if you want to hear it. They'll tell you about their family. They'll tell you about their ancestors. They'll talk about politics if you want, although most people kind of stay away from that subject, I guess. Most are not as behind the government as you would think they are. I mean, they're obviously growing up pretty poor, but there are signs or posters kind of everywhere about following the revolution, about Che, about Fidel, and you get this idea that these people, that's what they believe in, or that this is what the country is based on, but those are put up by the government, by a certain organization that is promoting the revolution and is dedicated to preserving it. And even though life is hard for a lot of Cubans, although they know that they are without a lot of things and that they come in contact with tourists or people like you that come in with their nice clothes and nice cameras, things that they could never buy, things that they could never have, they are still so accepting of you and so friendly and so happy. And the feelings or the energy that they give and the spirit that they bring, even though that they know that they don't have what you have or maybe could possibly never get it, is still so, what's the right word? It's really heartwarming, and it makes you think that you should never complain about anything, and that you can't be down on yourself, because these people have close to nothing sometimes, and yet they're smiling and they're happy and they go about their lives, and this is the life that they know. However, with that being said, there are people that do have money in Cuba. There are people that are able to rent out their rooms or make money on the black market, which is huge in Cuba. The black market is extremely large. But there are people with money, definitely. In Havana, I actually stayed in like a hostel the first night, and it's one of the only few places that you can find a hostel. But when I went to Vinales, which is the tobacco country a little bit west of Havana, I stayed with a family of 3 in these apartments. I didn't have any reservations, which you can do. I got off a bus. Someone asked if I needed a place to stay. She kind of waved me down, and I went with her. Her name was Rosalina, and she lived with her mother and her father. Her parents were actually born in a village outside a city a long time ago, and they were very poor. They had no electricity, no water, and once the revolution happened, or Fidel came into power, he actually built a lot of these apartment buildings in different cities around Cuba and moved all the people that lived in the countryside into these apartments for free. So that is one benefit, and the mother is very appreciative of that, and she is a very simple woman. She says she doesn't need a lot of fancy things. She's not materialistic, and she says that she was born in Cuba and she will die in Cuba. Her heart is here in Vinales, and she was a very sweet woman. They didn't speak a lick of English. Luckily, my Spanish was good enough where I could communicate with them, and she told me slightly about growing up in the village, how hard it was. They were very skinny. One of her brothers died at a very young age, and she was very happy to be living in this apartment. Although it was smaller, it still had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. She had a kitchen, she had water. all of her friends and family that she grew up in the village with were living in this apartment with her, so they all still knew each other. Um, and they all have a little balcony outside that looks into this beautiful valley of Vinales. And again, they just kind of wave at each other or talk however they like from their balconies and out to the people outside. And they're all still together. They all are still very close with each other. Um, however, they were very sweet. They were very welcoming, took great care of me, offered certain tours if I liked of the valley. The only thing about that, I guess I could say, is that the daughter, although she was very nice as well, one of the first things she asked of me was to see my clothes. And I thought that was really interesting, and so I showed her my clothes, and I had actually brought some gifts to give away to people that I was staying with, because I knew this how I'd be traveling. So I brought shampoos and makeup and, you know, feminine products and things like that. But she didn't really, she didn't want that. She wanted my clothes. So the t-shirts and things like that, they don't have that there. So they, as much as they want to be with American style, it's very difficult for them to purchase these clothes because they're very expensive. So I ended up giving her a t-shirt of mine, and it was, that was the one time I thought it was odd. She was a little bit, not forceful, but she was a little bit hungry to see what kind of things that I brought, and perfume and certain makeups and things like that. But I can't really blame her. Although I do think that she was a little bit materialistic to others that I had met along the trip. But the dad was also very nice. He was a sweet man. He didn't really speak a lot. They liked watching TV, but there aren't very many channels. They only have maybe 6 to 10 channels, I believe, and he watches the news every day, and there's only a half-hour news each. Half-hour news twice a day. And he really liked this singing show or an entertainment show, but they had lots of Cuban singers that would come on, or singers from around Latin America. And he was a quiet man, but he liked his television. And so that was, and they also will cook for you as well too. So that's kind of where I learned about the books and the food. In Vinales, I did go visit a tobacco farm. Tobacco is one of the main exports of Cuba, obviously. Everyone likes their Cuban cigars, which are all hand rolled. And you go and you see these just massive plots of tobacco leaves that are growing. And this is the most beautiful area that I saw of Cuba, just because it's so green, it's so lush. And although it's one of the most visited places, it's such a small town still because the farmland is so vast. But the people are very much still farmers. They're campesinos, as they call them. And a lot of places they still even don't have, some places they don't have electricity. But it's very lush, and the clouds roll by, and it's a really beautiful area. And the tobacco farmers actually have to give away 80% of their leaves of their growings back to the government, and they're only allowed to keep 20% for themselves. They are also not allowed to have a separate plot of land that's only for them, or only to grow or give to others. That's illegal. Their whole farm could actually be taken away if they are found growing any illegal amounts of tobacco. But I was actually able to see them dry the tobacco. They hang them in really long wooden logs, and they hang them in these handmade smoke houses as well that are made out of like branches and leaves. And they just hang racks and racks and racks of all these tobacco leaves and let them dry for I forget how many days. And then when they cut all the leaves, they pull out the little stem. They use different leaves from different parts of the actual tobacco plant, and then they just hand roll them and they cut them. And they showed you how to do that. And it was a very peaceful environment, but I also saw photos of actual factories, and there's just a lot of women basically with big bags of tobacco leaves, and they're just sitting there hand rolling all of these cigars, and then they get labeled and shipped off later, depending on which brand it's going to be. But this area also has a lot of really interesting caves. Uh, I think I heard all of Cuba, or at least most of Cuba, was at one point underwater. So they have these really awesome caves that have been formed out of, I don't remember which kind of mineral, but you can go under into these caves, and they're not as wide spreading as others, but they're very high. They have stalagmites, they echo, and it's the one cool place that you can be. It's just in this little pool area and in this surrounding cave, and they take you on a tour of that, and it's pretty cool. Although a lot of people, a lot of Cubans, even though that they live in this area, are afraid of the caves, whether it be because of heights, of claustrophobia, or that a spirit may live there. Some people that live, a mile away have never been there and say that they will never go down into these caves. But Vinales for me was the prettiest place that I went. I think it was because it was a little less city. There's literally only one main road, and then a couple little offspreads, and they use horse and buggies actually in a few places, in a lot of places actually still. So you can, and some guy can just pick you up on his little horse and take you over wherever you want. But there is a beautiful countryside that if you like environment, if you like the nature, go there. They have some nice hiking areas as well too. They have, like I said, lots of beautiful lush mountains that you can go off and backpack into. However, you are totally on your own after that. After Vinales, I took a bus to Cienfuegos and Trinidad. Those are two of the older cities in Havana. In Cuba. One, I wish I did more research on my history, because one of them was the first fortress that the Spaniards took over, I do believe. But so Trinidad is the oldest place that you can go to, and it still has cobblestone. It still has cobblestone streets, and although it is one of the most visited places, it still has a quieter tone to it at certain times. It's not as busy as bustling as Havana is. I think that is definitely the busiest city that has so much life. But anywhere you go, there are still people outside. There are always people sitting out on their doorsteps. There are always people walking around the streets. But Cienfuegos, I was able to spend the bulk of my time. Cienfuegos is first of all on the ocean, so it's a really nice city. It's very widespread. I actually enjoyed it because this is where this felt like a very normal Cuban city. This is where people grew up. This is where people live. It's a little bit slower pace, not as many tourists, but well, let me talk about the family that I stayed with because I really enjoyed living with them. The mother's name was Oli, and she was a tough lady. Her mother actually was 96 years old and still very much all here. She was really skinny. She was just bones pretty much and wrinkles, but she was very much a character, and I think living through so much things makes you have tough skin, and she was not the sweetest of ladies. She was very nice, but they were definitely tough and will tell you her opinion in a heartbeat. And she had osteoporosis, and she had a hip surgery a couple years ago. The surgery was free. All their health care is free. They do need to pay for certain medicines that are at a pretty affordable cost, though. The whole family kind of lived there. So they had this decently sized property. They had a bunch of different fruit trees in their backyard. They had about a 4-room house that they rented out, one room with 2 beds in there. And she had 2 sons that lived with her, and one of the grandsons that would sometimes stay with her. And Ronaldo was this 3-year-old boy, 2, 3-year-old boy, so lively, so cute. He was really shy in the beginning, but once I kind of gave him a little candy or played some games with him, he was very friendly and warm, and actually didn't want to leave me. But they were all just so nice and very down to earth, and they kind of told me about the real struggles that lots of people, even in the cities, go through. Because I was thinking, this family has a pretty nice home. I'm looking around, and they obviously can rent out a room. And so if you're paying, 15, 20, maybe even $30 a night in a night in one of their homes, that is comparable to a month's salary for some other people. So I'm thinking, this is pretty great deal they have. But because everyone rents out a room, you're not always guaranteed a guest. As well as, if you really think about it, you have 6 people living with you, you're going to need to buy more food. You have an elder you need to take care of. You need to buy medicine for one of their pills. Even if it's a packet for $5, she's going to need that continuously. Laura, the other girl that was living there, she had to have her tooth pulled, and aspirin costs money, and even though you think that you're giving them, you are giving them a substantial amount of money, it goes very, very quickly. They were the only home that I stayed with as well that had fruit trees, although I do think lots of other people probably do. As a whole, a lot of people don't grow their own food, which I found surprising because they live in such a tropical area. I don't know if it was regulated or just because people didn't want to, but the variety of food was not that expansive, and a lot of people did not have their own gardens, even to just grow little tomatoes, onions, things that are pretty easy and comparable to like Peru, where literally everyone had a garden or everyone grew something. The food, I think, for me was an issue because that's something that we all need to live. And if you were able to grow your own food, that takes a slight pressure away from your monthly income, because at least you have something. That was one thing that I thought was interesting, and one thing that I thought more people could learn about was to grow their own food. But for them, they found their ways making money doing their own things. And in Cienfuegos, the one tour that I went with was to the mountains. It's called El Nicho. And it was a national park, which they have, I think they have they have the highest percentage of national parks or preserved lands for the amount of space, one of the highest. And they have pretty strict laws as well for maintaining that land. For example, you can't spend more than 2 hours in the park at a time, so it really limits everyone's presence on the land. And although I enjoyed that tour very much, it was very beautiful and very surreal, like sitting under this waterfall in Cuba. It's all run by the government, again. So you pay the government for this tour. The tour guides are paid by the government, and the tour guide, if he said something like he could work 12 hours a day and he would only make $1.50 or something like that, because they get paid in national pesos. So these people still live on tips. These people, as much as you want to go explore the country, you are kind of forced to go through government agencies, which only funnels, again, money through the government. It doesn't really spread out to the majority of the people. You would think that certain food prices would be cheaper. Maybe the roads, for the most part, were actually pretty much well maintained, but lots of people will say, well, that's the road that you went on. So as a whole, I don't want to say people are complacent, because maybe there's just not much that they think they could do, but I think because you can hear so much dissatis. A lot of people are dissatisfied with the conditions that they're living in, but they really don't know what they can do other than focus on their own life and to prosper their family within their group. Um, so I don't know. Maybe if there was a collective movement of something, or I'm not sure, but I maybe things will change now with the more people coming in and seeing how wealth is unfairly distributed. Um, I'm thinking that it would be really interesting to go back in about 5 to 10 years to see how things have changed, if they've changed. Um, when when I was in Havana, the first American cruise ship in something like 50 years came, and this was the first time a lot of people have ever seen a cruise ship. And the cruise ship is massive, and the Cubans were taking videos and photos, and this was like the main event, was to see this big boat and all these people get off of it with all their fancy clothes. And to me, I feel like that has to change a person's perspective. I think that has to change a person's idea about things when you see something so massive and so grandeur that you never would have even thought there were boats that big or that could hold that many people. I think that people's mentalities will change, even though some say it wouldn't. They assured me that Cubans will be Cubans. We've fought so hard for our freedom, for what we believe in, that is never going to change. And I want to believe it, but at the same time, my capitalistic mind also believes that money changes people and money changes things. So I would really like to go back later to see how things are different, but I really hope that they don't change their culture, their mindset about how they view people, because that was just the most beautiful experience about the whole thing. Um, so Cuba was very different from any country I visited in South America. It has this weird mixture of being developed yet not quite developed. Although the buildings are very old, all the cars are very old, very nostalgic, there is still this very strong breath of life that is there, and they're not. And even though it's a poor country, it's not quite as poor as others I've been to. It's a very weird mix of things, because some people have, and they're all mixed together. There's not a rich person's area like they have in other countries, and it's not really segregated in that manner. But what was I going to say? I mean, I think it being a communist country itself is why it's so different. So yeah, why it was different in terms of, so everything around you is very old. The buildings, the cars, are old and have this, nostalgic feeling to it. But the people are listening to music that are on the radio here. People are keeping up with fashions, they're keeping up with news of today. So in that terms, they're very much in present times. Whereas in other places, as in Peru maybe, they're much more, in certain parts, it's very much cultured to the indigenous. And although it took me a couple days to kind of get used to it in Cuba, because I didn't know how safe it was, you feel it. It's just hard to explain. You just know. There aren't people looking at your bag or looking at you of what you're wearing, or they don't give you this feel. And it's only if you've been a traveler, it's only a feeling that you can explain. That when you first touch down in Lima, which is a very busy city as well too, you're always clutching your bag, you're always watching your back. You have to hold on to it, and the people tell you as well too. The people will tell you to make sure you're okay, and in Lima they'll tell you, be careful. You're a single lady. Are you okay? You should watch here, not go there. Whereas in Cuba, it's the complete opposite. The people will just tell you it's totally fine and that you can just walk freely. And even, well, I think also it helps on being an island and being controls in your space and well as the people. Because where if you're going to Latin America and you have people crossing, the borders all the time, you're mostly Peruvians or Chileans or Bolivians or whatever it may be, but there are always people moving to other countries to look for jobs, look for other homes, and so you do come across with a different mix of people, and they don't always like each other either. So they have that kind of racism against each other. But in Peru, in the other Latin American countries, I felt like it was much easier to travel. It was much easier to move around because you can just hail a bus, a taxi, or whatever it may be, but you had options. Whereas in Cuba, you don't have options. You have one bus company, and that is the only bus company you can take. And it's actually illegal to hitchhike in Cuba, although there are some points where it's allowed. Although I read about it, I didn't see any. Where hitchhiking in any other country is totally your choice, whether or not you want to risk that or not. I do recommend it in lots of places, though. If you're with someone, it's a great way to meet people, and it's usually it's pretty safe as well. Chile was the safest country out of the other ones that I've been to. However, I compare Chile to the United States. It has a very modern, capitalistic feel to it. People were not as friendly as they were in other places, and I don't know, a lot of it reminded me of the United States, actually, like a cousin of the US. And so with Americans coming into Cuba, I think, depending on which kind of Americans, I guess, go into Cuba, it might change. Well, so what I think, again, why I thought they were so special is because they're so open, they're so loving. And the woman that I lived with in Vinales, what she asked me was that I heard in the United States, people don't know their neighbors, and that you can live next to someone your whole life and not really know them. And I said, that's totally normal. It actually happens quite often. It's not uncommon to live in some house and maybe you say hello to them, but you know nothing about them. And I would think that that's pretty normal here in the United States. And she thought that was crazy. She thought that was insane. They see their neighbors, they talk to them every day. If they needed anything, if they needed, a cup of sugar, or if they needed a babysitter, if they needed something, that person would be there for them. And they knew that they could call on any one of their neighbors to help them in any type of situation, that they would be there for them because they are brothers and sisters, and Cubans treat Cubans that way. You can be from a totally other side of the island and yet come to this person that you don't even know and ask them for something, and they're going to be open arms, willing to give it to you because all of them are in it together, as they say. And that was one thing that, God, I wish that we had more of here. This camaraderie of people was amazing. And it's just funny, you can see all these people just go over and talk to someone really quickly, and they have this nice little chat or whatever, and like, oh, do you know him? No, I've never met him in my life, actually. Or you need a ride somewhere, and they just hop in the back of the truck and do that. They're just so trusting. And I think that and the respect level as well there for people of, color, age, ethnicity, or gender as well is just higher there. People, they don't steal because it's a matter of respect. They're not going to pickpocket you. They're not going to try to cheat you because it's disrespectful, and that's just not how they are. And I mean, how great would that be if we could just all trust each other and just respect each other and not have to worry about that? Whereas other places here, Latin America, other places in the world, you just don't really find that often. And I think that, hopefully as we come in, as Americans come in to visit their country, that we can show them the respect that they deserve and show them that, we're coming into their country to learn from them and to visit how they live and not try to change it, because It's not our job or our duty to do anything like that. And I also think it's really important that when we go in mind that they do have different values and that we're in their country and we need to adapt. And that goes for saying, I think, for any place that you visit, that you need to adapt because you are not in your comfort zone anymore, but you should be following their rules and how they go about living their lives or their ideals about things. So hopefully, as Americans continue to go, we one, support the people and try to stay away from giving too much to the government and really understand that difference, and as well as giving to those people, and then also not trying to impart any of our beliefs on how they should be, to change that. I mean, because that's really up to them as well. And I hope they all stay as collective as they have been, because that was one thing I really enjoyed seeing is the brotherhood, I guess, there, and they all have will tell you that as well too. Though it's one thing they take a lot of pride in is being Cuban, even though that they know there's a lot of problems, and also that are all they're all in it together, that they are going to help each other. It's one thing that they'll repeat to you as well. See, he's my brother, even though I don't even know. That's just how we are, they say. And I really enjoyed seeing that, because one thing that I really like about Latin cultures is you can walk down the street or whoever and, buenos dias, hello, good afternoon to anyone, everyone. Doesn't matter who you know them or not. Whereas here, if you say hello to someone on the street just walking by, they maybe wave at you, but they think it's odd or they think it's weird. And how simple is that? That it's just a nice hello for someone could be such a nice little thing to brighten someone's day, or just even create that bond between someone that you live in the same community with. I mean, it's so far that we just are on our phones or in this tunnel vision that we can't say hello to another person walking by us. I think that's so strange, and that we're all still so guarded, and we're all we just like our personal space and we like our privacy. We're a very private culture in that way, which is fine as well too. But personally, that's one thing I really like about the Latin culture. So they're usually pretty open, and they're going to give you hugs and kisses every time they see you. Every time you leave, it's an ordeal. Whereas here, we've kind of put ourselves in our homes and our little boxes, and we maybe go to work and we do this, but we don't really make a lives outside of that for ourselves, and we don't really create communities like we do there. Whether like the communities there could just be the people that you live around. It could be your church. It could be the people that you farm with. It can be whatever. It can be anything. They create small and large communities on different bases. But here, I feel like you have to join a group. You have to join something. You have to join a gym. You have to join a rec or something to create that for yourself. And I think a lot of people are missing that and could benefit from that, is having a community, having people to rely on, having people to depend on, or whatever it may be. Having that acceptance there is important for humans, I think. And I think it would benefit a lot of us if we had that. And I guess just being a little bit friendlier in certain places as well too, we could use. But I think the fact that they create communities there is what I liked so much about it. And you kind of see that dissipate in certain parts of Chile, which is still, a Latin country in South America, but has more of that American feel. People get their own houses with their own yards, or they're in an apartment building that they don't talk to their neighbors again. But granted, there are still many places that they're much more close knit. So I think one, I'll be traveling for the rest of my life, but right now I have this freedom in my young 20s to kind of go for long periods of time, which is what I really enjoy. And so my next trip will be to Asia. I will be going to Japan for sure, probably staying in the southern region for the most part. And then hopefully I will be going to the Philippines and then to Vietnam, Thailand, and possibly Cambodia and Myanmar if I have the time. Um, so definitely want to spend a lot of time in Japan. I am of Japanese ancestry, and it will be my first time going, so I'm really excited for that. Um, and and then yeah, the Philippines. I have some friends there as well too. But I like places that have been slightly untouched still. I know Japan's not, but that aren't quite as developed. So hopefully I will be able to go to all those countries. I would really love to go to Nepal actually as well, since I like to hike. Um, but hopefully I make it. Hopefully I make it to all the continents, everywhere I want to go. And after Asia, um, maybe somewhere in Africa as well too. I think Tanzania would be a really cool country to go visit and see some new interesting things. So as as the travels continue, it'll be lots more places I'll go. See?